Good evening. This is LMC Media Community Conversation. We are live with New York State Senator Shelley Mayer, who represents the 37th New York State Senate District, which covers Larchmont, Mamaroneck, and Rhinebeck. Shelley, thank you so much for joining us. We are,
Pleasure to see you, Maura.
as I said, we are live and we are taking questions. So if anyone wants to email them, lmctv@lmctv.org. So Shelley, everyone wants to know, when does this end and when does life go back to normal or some semblance of normal?
Some semblance of normal. I don't have the magic answer any more than anyone else does, but I will tell you the standards that the governor has imposed in determining when things open by region. So we are in a region that is called the Mid-Hudson Economic Development Region. So we're not just Westchester and Rockland. There's 5 counties. And together we have to meet these 7 metrics. And if you've seen the governor every day, as some of us have and watch him every day, he has described these 7 metrics. They have to do with hospitalization rates, death rates, capacity of our healthcare system, new entrants into the hospital. There's 7 measures that determine over a period whether we are gradually declining to a sufficient degree that under guidelines that were really based on the CDC, it is appropriate to open by region. So it's not just Westchester alone. Now, we had a call today with County Executive George Latimer, and Westchester County and our region is getting close to meeting all 7, but we are not there. We are continuing to decline in hospitalizations, decline in deaths, a decline in intubations. So we are moving very much in the right direction. We have met a number of the metrics. I asked George sort of when are we going to get there to the 7, and of course he doesn't know because we don't know how many people, unfortunately, will be hospitalized tonight or die tonight. But I would say we are clearly, hopefully a few weeks away from stage 1 of the reopening. And that's the second part of the conversation, Maura, because once we reopen, there's 4 stages as set out by the governor. The first one is really about construction and other kinds of drive-by or drop-off retail, but we don't get back to it closer to our normal lives until we get to 2 and 3, stage 2 and 3, and really stage 4, which is schools. So and the other thing he said is that these stages are staged in 2-week period. Now, there could be changes. This could be modified. He could say the medical evidence shows that we could speed up or we could slow down. But you've heard him talking about the valves. So there are these 7 measurements, and you can go online and read and understand. They're really very thoughtful, well explained, as are the 4 stages of opening. So answer, I don't know, but we are moving towards stage 1.
So, and that's on the New York State Regional Dashboard, which is available through the state. So we're in the Hudson Valley region, which includes Rockland, Orange, Putnam, Dutchess, Sullivan, and Ulster. What happens when Westchester in our community hits all 7, but let's say Dutchess doesn't?
Well, I think there are areas in which we are doing better than the other counties. For example, we're doing much more testing than they are. So our testing metric is better, but probably our death rate is higher because we have Westchester Medical Center, which is a medical center for the entire region of the most serious cases. So we're going to have more deaths recorded there. So I think whether we like it or not, this is the determination. Our evaluation is based on all of the counties together. So Westchester might be doing well, Rockland might not be doing well enough. The way it is structured, we all have to meet these metrics collectively, and that's the way it is. I just want to say one thing about how the governor has provided leadership. This was an incredible challenge to stand into a place where really nobody knew everything that was going to happen. And even here today, he said, how many of the experts were wrong about so many things. And you can agree and disagree with his style and everything else, but the governor has shown remarkable leadership and courage and helped New York guide through a difficult period. I've had many disagreements with him over the years. I have nothing but complete respect for the way he's managed it. So he put these counties together by region. You could quarrel with it. You know, we are adjacent to New York City, but we have to meet them collectively as a region.
So what do you say to people who think it's too extreme or going on too long? Why can't we just tell people over 50 to stay home and let everyone else out? You know, some of the things that one will read on social media. What do you say to them?
Well, I think it's quite clear that this is far more contagious than any of us thought. At the beginning, it was only, you know, people over 70 or 60, children were not at risk. It was only people with underlying health conditions. So much of that has proven not to be the most salient facts. They may be relevant. So to simply say people over 50 should stay home, let us make decisions based on the science. And these metrics are very thoughtful, scientifically based. I myself agree with the governor. Saving lives is unfortunately, sadly, the task at hand. And we are doing better. We're doing much better. We had under 200 deaths today. But, you know, we have had such a significant number of deaths in New York State. I understand people's frustration. I deal with it every day in my office. And also the economic hardship of having the economy close. That being said, we're getting there. People are losing their patience. I think a little more patience is in order, and let's do it the safest way we can. The loss of someone in your family is not something you can sort of exchange for going to work sooner. We're just not that kind of society, and that's not the kind of New York and America that I think most of us want to live in.
We received a question about how to, on a practical level, how to
Yeah.
reopen, whether it's local offices or municipalities, or the timing, the equipment that might be needed, protocols, how you staff it. Do you have any guidance on that?
Well, one thing is that businesses that are in the queue to reopen have to submit plans to the regional group that is going to help decide these things. And each region, including ours, and obviously George Latimer is on it, is going to have sort of a war room that helps decide these issues. You have to have a plan that has to be approved by that group. So, for example, you may need social distancing in your business. You may need to deliver your retail goods outside. A jeweler wrote me, what am I supposed to do? I can't take my jewelry outside to sell it and show it. Each of these is going to require evaluation and a plan. So there is going to be an obligation on business to come up with a plan, the most safe, effective, and a responsible way to engage in business with this pandemic overlay. So these regional boards, so to speak, or war room, as I call them, will be helping to work on these plans and approve them as we move forward. All the details more are not clear. You're absolutely right. The caller is right. All the details are not known for every kind of business. The first order of business, construction, in many of those cases, the workers and the developers are making arrangements to ensure a safe workplace. That's going to be number one issue.
Keeping the workers safe in the environment.
Yes, yes.
Will they still be required to keep 6 feet between them? I mean, some
I think-
businesses, that's very hard.
It is very hard in construction. I think there's going to be a requirement for some social distancing, obviously for wearing masks, possibly for staggering shifts, so fewer people are on the job at one time. We'll wait to see the actual details as they come forth on construction, which is the first order of business. We're not there yet, though. Sorry to say.
This is, you know, besides the human cost, there's been a tremendous economic and financial cost.
Terrible. Terrible.
And the Senate, the legislature approved a budget right before things
Right.
got really bad. what happens now? And what kind of hole is this creating for New York State? And I assume it's a hole.
Oh, it's a huge hole, $12 billion. So what happened is, we were moving towards doing an on-time budget, which we did, end of March, a balanced budget, which we were required to do, and we did. That being said, this pandemic was coming, and on March 2nd, we passed legislation to allocate $40 million and give the governor extraordinary powers, which some members had trouble with. But I thought, in the back of my head, I thought, I don't want political fighting. Someone's got to be a decision maker and authorized to do the tough things, be right or wrong. So we passed that. And then we moved to negotiating the best budget we could. But the budget was terrible already because we were starting to shut down and they projected less tax revenue. Now it got much worse, like you said. And we are anticipating about a $12 billion budget deficit in the coming fiscal year. Under the budget we adopted, the governor has three opportunities to review whether the amount of money coming in is less than was projected. The first one ended on April 30th, but he put out his projection of this $12 billion deficit, but he did not identify what cuts he wants to make. He can propose those cuts, and the legislature has 10 days to come back and say, don't cut education, instead cut healthcare. Don't cut healthcare, cut the prisons, but we can't do anything other than reallocate where the cuts are. So we're in a very tough time. And that's why this plea for federal money is so urgent. Because honestly, New York State can't make up $12 billion. We don't have a tax base that sustains that. We are really hurting financially, and we need the federal Congress and the federal government to help us. That's why the bill that the Democrats in Congress put out is an excellent step forward that gives unallocated money to the state of New York, $22 billion this year, money to all of our municipalities, all of them, and gives targeted money that I care about also for education. So I don't know if we can get this bill because we're into the politics of Congress, but this is a very important step. And without this money, and even with the money, the governor has threatened 20% cuts in education, healthcare, and all other services. And that could be imminent.
We're going to come back to that in a moment, but there are some who say that New York State's financial condition was not great. Some would call it worse than that before the pandemic hit. Is that the case or not?
Well, we did have a budget shortfall as we went into this year's budget. That happens in many years. And in fact, we were charged with cutting Medicaid spending, which was terrible. I mean, we voted for a budget that cut Medicaid, even though less than the governor wanted, but we cut Medicaid in the middle of this pandemic. I think New York has been in a growth mode. We have lowered taxes on many things over the time that the governor has been governor and that we have been working in the majority. We've made the tax cap permanent. We recognize the burden on taxpayers, but the fact is New York's economy was moving in a very healthy direction, but this was a catastrophe. And when catastrophes happen, you have to respond. And the best response is the federal government. Just like we helped states that had hurricanes, earthquakes, or other disasters, this is the equivalent of a natural disaster that hit New York hardest of all.
So should we be expecting our taxes to go up to pay for it?
I hope
less money.
Well, I don't think there's an appetite for all taxes to go up at all. And I hope that taxes do not go up. I have a modest proposal for those at the very top of the taxable income stream earning 5 million or more. And I was never a fan of increasing taxes. But during this pandemic, I saw firsthand in my district who was sort of the immediate sufferers, so to speak, those who were really weren't going to be able to pay rent or their mortgage, put food on the table, in a state of utter panic because they lost their job and their income and they did not have any reserve. That's the big difference. A person who earns 5 million or more or reports earnings of 5 million or more has something to fall back on. A person who earns 60,000, and we have thousands of them in our community, who lost their job at a restaurant, a small business that had to close. They have very little to return to tide them over. So I have this proposal that really came out of this pandemic, calling the SHARE Act. It's about sharing sacrifice. For 2 years, I'm proposing that those that currently pay the top tax rate, which is 8.82, would be raised to 10.9 for a 2-year period. Just those earning 5 million or more, of which there are some in our community, and there are some in the state of New York. But I think we are at a time of crisis. This is not going to bail out New York by any means. It's just one part of a menu of things. Really, we need mostly federal money, but that's probably not going to be enough.
So under your proposed SHARE Act, is the higher tax on, I assume it's adjusted gross income over 5 million, or
Yeah.
all of one's income?
No,
if it-
all of one's income if you earn and report 5 million or more. It's a
And
flat rate.
how much would you expect that to raise in the state?
Well, when I started and the pandemic was just starting, I thought it was 2 billion. I've reduced it downward to a little over 1 billion because we do anticipate that people at the high end that earn 5 million. I just want to be clear, that's not having a house worth 5 million. This is actual earnings. It includes investment earnings. Those are likely to decline, and we recognize that. So we've significantly downwardly adjusted the impact, and the money from this, my proposal, would go 85% to K through 12 education, public schools, and 15% to SUNY and CUNY. And that's about the proportion of how the state gives money to public schools and the public colleges and university system.
And would it just go to, the funding that goes out to individual districts, or is it earmarked for other things within education under your proposal?
No, it would really go towards the money that schools get under the current state allocation and formula for K through 12, and for SUNY and CUNY it goes into a fund, a special fund, so that it can't be sort of taken for other purposes, which is something that happens in state government and in the federal government too. When you're desperate and there's money over here and you need money over here, people move money around, and I've been known to do that in my personal life. But we are targeting this and putting in a special fund because without this protected education money, the likely impact on schools and colleges and universities is possibly a 20% cut. And now I'm hopeful that's much less.
Well, isn't this really it's a reallocation of income from rich districts to poorer districts, isn't it?
No, because I actually don't think that's correct, because there are people earning 5 million. The vast majority of them live in Manhattan by a long shot, long shot. They are by far the greatest number of people earning 5, 10, and 100 million. Those are increments that I've seen in terms of tax reporting. So actually, these individuals who live outside New York live in various communities, and the money that would be garnered by this would go under the current allocation. So it doesn't mean that a district like Bedford, for example, where some of these high net worth individuals and high income earners, is they not going to get money in the Bedford School District, which happens to have real challenges because of a declining enrollment and some other challenges. They're going to receive money under this program as well. So every district should receive money.
I'm going to come back to education, but we actually received a couple of emails, and I want to let those questions come first. The first is, when are you going to open the playgrounds with sensory swings? Our children with disabilities are suffering.
Well, one, I know our children with disabilities are suffering, and it's something that I raise on every call that I have, is with distance learning, as challenging as it is for abled children, it is not working well for children with special needs.
Well, you can't get an aid there.
No, you can't get an aid. All the 10 extra services that children have under their IEPs are not provided in the way that really works. Ideally, many people are going out of their way to do the best they can, but this does not work. So use of sensory playgrounds, as far as I'm concerned, as soon as playgrounds can open, which I hope is sooner rather than later. We may have to work out some social distancing in playgrounds and have limits to the number of children there. But I am hopeful that we can push for that as soon as possible, because the weather will be warm, children are cooped up in their homes, and children with special needs, we are going to have to compensate for what could have been a loss of development during this time of distance learning. I'm very, very concerned about children with special needs during this period.
And how is that actually going to affect the education budget? Because there will be compensatory learning
Yeah.
that, IEPs didn't go away, but they couldn't necessarily be fulfilled from distance learning. And the services will have to be made up. Won't that be an extra cost?
Yes, and that's the reason why in the congressional bill I referenced earlier, there is dedicated funding for education costs attributable to COVID. Exactly to that point, compensatory learning, we may need summer school. Some kids may not have graduated high school and may need extra help to get there to graduate high school or move to the next grade. I'm very worried that some students are not going to be ready to move from 8th to 9th grade because they fell behind during this period. So we need compensatory, and we're going to need mental health services. This is a challenge for adults. It's very much a challenge for young people. And we know we're going to need additional mental health services. Schools have been now tasked with providing food and in some cases childcare. These are things that are outside of sort of the normal scope of what schools provide when the building is closed. So there are going to be additional costs, and we've been advocating with Congress, and I just want to say that Congresswoman Lowy and Engel and our two senators have been great champions of getting additional money for the state, for the municipalities, because we're not even talking about their loss of tax revenue, and for our school districts and colleges and universities.
And that's perfect, because we have another question about who can I pressure to get Congress to help New York?
Well, I would say that our Congress people who represent us are already there, and they've really done a superb job. What I would say, and our senators as well, is if you know senators, people in other states that are represented by the majority in the Senate, which is Republicans, we need them to be our partners in this. This is not a partisan fight. This is a fight about the future of New York, the center of the country in terms of economic activity, arts activity, and a vibrant and very dynamic state in the union. We need help, and we need it from all comers. And the President Trump is working closely with Governor Cuomo on as many things as they can. I think we all recognize we're going to need the president's signature on a bill that helps New York, and we need him to be a partner. So if you know someone in another state represented by a majority member in the United States Senate, urge them to let their member know that this is a national crisis. People want New York to recover. We have millions of people come from all over the world to see this fantastic city and fantastic state. And we really need a national commitment to make that happen. And New York is not the only state on the hook here, our whole region, but we have had such a disproportionate impact.
Education. Any ideas? I mean, this is what everyone wants to know. Summer school and even summer camps. You know what's happening?
I don't know what's going to happen with summer camps. I suspect the governor may make an announcement about that in the near future. There's obviously the camp community is in a great state of stress because they don't know whether they're going to open. Parents don't know whether it's going to be available, and they have made their voices known. And to the governor and his staff's credit, they try to be very responsive when the issues are raised. They can't deal with everything, but I do think camps will be shortly, I hope, dealt with. Summer school, I think prior to this more recent issue of younger children having something that is related to the coronavirus, now we have 100 young people in New York who have had some kind of health issue related to a positive COVID test or potentially. I think there's going to be a little bit of reluctance to rush back to summer school. I think there was a lot of interest in summer school. Kids could do the compensatory learning. Parents maybe could go back to work, at least on a part-time basis or a half day. I wouldn't be surprised, and this is my speculation, that this very legitimate concern of parents about sending children into group settings is going to slow that down, even though, it's unfortunate and disappointing. But, as parents, I think we all know that that is a very real threat.
What happens in the fall? The big question. Are they going back to school?
Well, I certainly hope we're going back to school buildings. I would say we are in school. School is not closed. School buildings are
Okay,
closed.
fair enough.
And I hope we go back to school buildings. I think the experience of school, it's interesting to me as sort of a person who's a proponent of public education all the time, that now people realize that school is not just, many people knew this, learning in sort of a reading, writing, and arithmetic way, but the social engagement of young students and older people, including colleges and universities, is part of the experience that lets people grow up. And we need that back. And parents need it back. Parents were not, prepared to be teachers of algebra and geometry and Common Core. And, this is not what parents signed up for either. So we need school. I am hopeful we can move towards school. The governor has a task force, as does the chancellor, Betty Rosa, who is a former superintendent in the Bronx and has a real feel for what schools look like. She has put together a task force that is going to have the voice of parents as well as administrators. I think it's going to be very robust. I'm hopeful the PTA is well represented throughout our region, and they are going to come up with operational suggestions for how to open school. But I certainly hope school opens.
But there was a task force for education, and I don't think there was anyone from the Hudson Valley region, or at least not from Westchester. No superintendents from Westchester. Does that sound right?
Well, yes, it sounds right, and it was very disappointing. The first school reopening task force did not have any as far as I recall, anyone from K through 12 education anywhere in the state. It only had higher education. The governor then created it did have a person from Westchester on it. She is a fantastic person, but she's not involved with K through 12 education or higher education. They then created another subcommittee, and they have some people. I don't believe any superintendents from the Hudson Valley are on. And I would say, not that everyone here is from New York, but we have the city of New York, the largest public school system in the country in our state. And no one from the New York City public schools was represented on the governor's initial committee either. So that's why I think this Chancellor Rosa's committee is a very important on the ground, teachers, administrators, and people who know what schools are like, and parents, including parents of students with special needs.
Do you have any idea of what it's going to look like? I mean, if we're going to continue social distancing, if they go back to school, they're going to do shifts? I mean, is there any discussion about that?
I think there is a discussion about shifts. There were shifts, some of us remember, in big urban high schools for a long time. In the baby boom generation, in the 60s, there were shifts in high school. That is a possibility. I think there is a possibility of, there has been this conversation raised about alternative days. I think it's a terrible idea. I'm not a fan of that. Go to school some days, not other days. There could be some things that are distance learning and some things that are in school learning. I think the governor has expressed some interest in that. I'm not a big fan of that myself. I think we need interaction with human beings, particularly teachers who have done really, on the whole, an extraordinary job of stepping up. And particularly, in Larchmont and Mamaroneck, I hear fantastic stories of what teachers have done to make sure the students' needs are met. So I would like to see a real school building. I think we may have to use schools on the weekends, which I've always been a favor of. Schools later in the evening. The schools are paid for by the whole community. It may be time that they serve the whole community in a longer day and a longer period. But that's going to require negotiations with a lot of people in the school community, including teachers and other staff. I hope we get to a real school building come September.
So people who need help, I know your office is available to help. They need financial aid or help with oh goodness, PPE applications or unemployment insurance. How do they contact you?
So unemployment is a huge challenge in my office. We're all working all the time to help people through the system. Thousands of people throughout the district, but certainly in Mamaroneck and Larchmont are applying and need help. So email me, smayer, M-A-Y-E-R, @nysenate.gov, and someone will call you. We will help you. We will fight for you. And that's what I will do.
Okay. Your chance to pitch on the census.
Oh, thank you so much, Maura, because that census, if there ever was a time when it was clear New York needed to be counted for everyone who lives here and get the money and the services and the representation we need, this is that moment. I did it like one of the first few days we were quarantined at home. It takes 15 minutes, 10 minutes, it's nothing. But without it, we really hurt ourselves. So I just encourage everyone, get our numbers up in the very high percentage. Let's have 90% response in our communities. That would make a huge difference in how much money we get and in how our representation goes forward.
Senator Shelley Mayer, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back and keep us updated.
Thank you, Maura. Pleasure to see you. I'd rather see you in the studio, but your house looks lovely, and
Thank you.
hope all is well with you and your family.
Thank you. Same to you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.